How many times have you had the deep to great conversation? I'm just choosing some names at random, but Fernando, the work is good, but not great. Veronica, the work is good, but not great. Juan Carlos, the work is good, but not great. I guess all of you have had them. I've had them with Kai, my creative partner, and it's always he who starts them. He's had them with Gaston, with Anselmo, with Maxi and Javi, with Checha, with Ferrero. And right now, we're having a new conversation, superlative conversation. Hey, the work's great, but is it really superlative? It's kind of mean, isn't it? Just when you're so happy to have got great. But David Ogilvy, who we still adore, thought this sort of restless questioning was divine. He called it divine discontent. Being here in Ojo de Iberoamerica gives me a great sense of pride. I'm honored not least because I can be with my own creative colleagues from Latina again, who have been a disproportionate part of our quest for creative greatness. They are full of divine discontent. To be honest, 5 years ago, they were not so great. Then they made a commitment to be the best. Of course, they did what anyone with a sense of purpose does. They designed a logo. And this is their logo. Morismos Millones. Now, I don't know much about lions, or I didn't, until our creative council took me into the East African jungle last year. I learned from a tracker that you must be confident. And if you come across a lion, you don't yield an inch, you just look him in the eye. We learned not to be afraid of lions. Lions in the flesh and lion dog. Let me also say that I adore chorizos. I love them so much that when I used to live in Hong Kong, I went all the way to Macau just to buy them, where they were imported from Portugal. So I love and I celebrate my colleagues in the audience. Millones y chorizos indeed, brave and hot. I think they are enjoying the superlative conversation we are having. 10 years ago, it could not have been of the same sort. We have lived through a revolution where conversations undertaken on a small scale can now be socialized on a very large scale. We can call it the socialization of advertising. I want to suggest to you this morning that superlative cannot now be achieved without the social effect of the web. To move from great to superlative, you must have a social dimension, and it has to be large. The bad news is it is not so easy. In fact, it is becoming, and will I think become increasingly quite difficult, because it's a crowded world out there. I'd like to show you one of my favorite marketing charts. It dates from the 1980s, before the internet. It was prophetic. It's the work of a man called Professor Henri Clapp. And he was pondering the fragmentation of media and the sheer quantity of information that was coming into the world, even before the internet. And he invented this concept of lag, of meaning lag, which means that as the quantity of information we receive increases, our inability to extract meaning from it is lessened. Meaning is also found at lower levels of quality in order to compensate for losing meaning. And that probably explains why so-called internet memes have become progressively shorter. This professor is all but forgotten now, but his thinking has never been more relevant. Interestingly, as the density of the content increases, so it seems that we're beginning to adapt. And one form of adaptation is to create, as it were, mental ad blocks. We just tune out. So why do people sometimes, and eagerly, and in large numbers, tune in? Here's a piece of work originally from our Australian office, and now global, for the Coca-Cola Company.
Last September, in the dead of night, the world's most iconic brand did the unthinkable and took an entire country by surprise. 150 of Australia's most popular names appeared on millions of bottles of Coke. Why? Because in the previous month alone, 50% of teens and young adults hadn't even tasted a Coke. We had to reconnect with Australia, so we decided to get personal and invited Australians all over to share a Coke.
Classy Kate. Crazy Kate. If you know a Kate, share a Coke with Kate. Or Mel, or Dave.
Our message was everywhere, digitally and interactively, at Sydney's iconic Coke billboard. Whichever way you turned, it was you and your friends up in lights. The media instantly took notice. The internet blew up. Australia had fallen in love.
Coca-Cola, sharing a Coke, sharing a Coke.
Thousands of requests poured in from all names, but we were ready. With kiosks where people could get any name printed on a Coke can, the queues went for hours. But the requests kept flooding in, so we put to a vote, and after thousands of people got their say, 50 new names were released. We invited everyone to share a Coke, and share they did. Australians were once more connected over the world's most iconic brand. The stats: 870% increase in Facebook traffic, 12,020,000 earned media impressions, 76,000 virtual Coke cans shared, 378,000 custom Coke cans printed, and in just 3 short months, young adult consumption increased by 7%, 5% more people were drinking Coke, transactions grew by 3%, volume increased by 4%. With one simple tweak to a label, Coke once again became part of popular culture.
So this program garnered millions and millions of impressions. It's moved all over the world. Wherever it's run, it's grown Coke volume, often against the market, and it's helped reignite the relationship of teens and young adults to one of the world's most iconic brands. So what was going on? Quite simply, being socially connected is something fundamental to our psychological well-being. As adolescence progresses, young adults spend less time with family, more time with peers. And these peer relationships become intimate the more experiences are shared. So happiness is a shared experience. We've always shared, but the internet allows us to share more. And in sharing, we feel better. As one internet commentator has put it, I am made greater by the sum of my connections. So are my connections. So nowadays, I guess we could say that the Cartesian formula would be, I connect, therefore I am. How then do we stimulate sharing? And so we come to my title, The Art of Arousal. I chose this title with some care. An earlier draft was actually Techniques of Arousal, but it didn't quite express my point of view. And if you Google that phrase, the results are often quite unfortunate. It gets you into the world of the nauseo sexologist, Dr. Ruth Westheimer, and other more dubious pastimes. But arousal is a respectable concept. It's what provides the organism with energy for psychological and motor activity. In short, it's what guides the finger to share on the computer screen. It was recognized a long time ago that some television programming can create arousal very effectively. But the sharing impact of the internet has led to an increasing study of the phenomenon. And so to prepare myself, actually, for coming here, I tried to study some of the literature. And in doing so, I induced in myself a state of very low arousal, I have to say. So I've read the Journal of Interactive Advertising, Market Leader, AdMap, the Journal of Marketing Research, the Australian Marketing Journal, and many more. I've read the research of Taylor, Strutton, Thompson, Cushman, Earl, Binet, Field, Netherfield, Weaver, Newstead, Morgan, and Berger. You might have heard of Jonah Berger, Associate Professor of Marketing at the Wharton School in Pennsylvania. He wrote a book called Contagious, which is quite useful. But you're lucky, because I can spare the labor of about 6 hours of reading and summarize all these findings very simply. Essentially, what they demonstrate is that it's heightened emotions which drive people to share information. Berger has tended to emphasize the arousal of the subject. For instance, email sharing is boosted immediately after physical exercise because of the good feelings which physical exercise induces. And he emphasizes that as opposed to the content of the message. He doesn't actually so much study film. He studies news clippings and other material. But as practitioners, we know that content itself creates the context, and therefore the arousal. And other academics who have studied film confirm that social transmission is affected by the emotional content. Arousal is caused most by positive, as opposed to negative, emotional content. The emotion has to be highly arousing for it to be shared in large numbers. And our academics confirm that successfully designing high arousal content is rare and rather difficult. Arousal has a disinhibitory effect, which means that you're encouraged to share more and more. And stimuli which exhibit high arousal also exhibit a reminiscence effect. In other words, we remember more. The more the emotion reflects the self-concept of the subject, the more likely sharing will take place. There's also another way of studying arousal. Let's call it field observation. It will be tedious to do this by myself, or rather it will take a lot of time in front of the screen. There's BuzzFeed, for instance, who grasped the principle of arousal and turned it into a business proposition through emotional stacking. That's what their lists actually do. As you look at the 45 most powerful photographs of last year, one photograph adds to another in terms of emotional intensity. It's a very clever device. But I also confess to a mild addiction in the States where I live to =3. I don't know if any of you have watched =3, but Ray William Johnson is a Columbia University graduate who presents it. He's a very funny man. It's very politically incorrect, but in a nice way. And it gets 6 to 10 million views for every edition. Essentially, it reviews viral content and asks the same question: what makes this shared? If you haven't seen it, here's a little taste.
Hey guys, Mother's Day was Sunday, so if you didn't call your mother and wish her happy Mother's Day, don't worry, I did it for you. I'm gonna be moving today, guys. Why? Because I found this video of this dog dancing to Eminem's Shake That. And this video is great. It's actually old. It's from 2011, and it sat dormant until last week when it got up and decided, hey, I'm gonna go viral today, getting 2.5 million views. Is this a coincidence that he's listening to a song with Nate Dogg on the hook? I mean, it's also against the songs by Snoop Dogg, Free Dog Night, Pitbull, and now I still love the dog.
Okay, you get the picture. So I've, based on my viewing of =3, come to the belief that there are 4 types, essentially, of shareable video content on the internet that's acceptable. The first is the jocular, the joke, and the joke is usually, of course, against someone. The second is the pranky, or the prank. And the prank could be, typically, for instance, a lost bikini top that turns into a sharp spin when a guy is about to dive into a pond and retrieve it. And then there's the absurd, the bulldog riding on a skateboard. And then finally there's the cute, which is the 2 bunnies and 2 plastic cup syndrome. So those are the plots, actually, of the internet. But what are the cast? Well, they would make the bar in Star Wars look like the lounge of the RBR Palace, which I gather is the most conservative hotel in Buenos Aires. Because this is the world of scary raptor reptiles, of cats fighting alligators, of carrot-eating contests, of mutant poodles. I'm sorry, did I say mutant poodles?
Okay, Forum, I don't get scared easily, but there's this promotional video for Panasonic from a few years back that is the spawn of Satan. I swear to you, it gave me nightmares. I can't even explain it. A user named Underrated Studio sent it to me. Just watch.
Hi, I'm Mariko Takahashi. Can you guess who this is? Yes, it's me. You can't believe it, huh? Thanks. But what I want to say here is hope that anyone can do it. But the point is not only to lose weight. That's what could fail. We'll be building muscular strength. That's what this video is about. Beauty and strength. This is connected to everything in life. Connected to victory and happiness. Victory and happiness is the most important thing for everyone. Okay, let's go.
And it's even worse than that, actually. There's something about the darker edges of Japanese advertising which makes it very virally persistent. Like these.
The title of this particular video is Vagina Bubbles from Hell. If only I were making that up. Now, it's a clip from an old Japanese TV show or movie, and enjoy.
That's enough. My point is that this is the undergrowth, if you like, of the internet. It's wild, it's steamy, it's scary. Now if there were going to be questions after this talk, someone might ask me, Miles, what are you reading at the moment? And thanks to the recommendation of a friend, I would reply, perhaps to your surprise, the autobiography of P.T. Barnum. I don't know if you've heard of P.T. Barnum, but he was one of the greatest showmen in the history of entertainment. And this is a poster of his from the 19th century, where he promised the greatest show on earth. He drew in thousands, for instance, by exhibiting a mummified monkey's torso, which was attached to the tail of a fish. And the slogan was, roll up, see the mermaid. Now, there are many mermaids on the internet. That's the world of Barnum. But the art of arousal has to go beyond that. If we're going to entertain, we have to entertain better than that. We have to tell stories. You know, that bulldog on a skateboard is a curiosity. It's not a story. And if you think about the origins of stories, they were designed for transmission. They were shareable content, passed on from one storyteller to another. When the Anglo-Saxon author of Beowulf, of which this is the manuscript, wrote down the first lines of that story, he was formalizing a prototypical narrative that had an earlier existence. Hail, it said. Praise the prowess of people kings, of spear-armed Danes, in days long sped. We have heard what honor the Athens won. It's a story which still exists to this day, now in film. The story of a hero's journey to battle is something which changes him forever. It's emotionally charged from beginning to end. So let's say that the tension in the internet is between Barnum versus Beowulf. Grumpy Cat was just a curiosity until he found his own narrative, his own story as the spokes-cat for Fishes. Now here's an example from our London office of how a joke can become a story and elevate itself beyond just the jocular. Now this unfortunately is an English joke, so of course it's got to be about French people, and I don't expect you to find it very funny. But Kronenbourg, a French medium lager, has been in decline in England for a long time. The joke in this case is on Eric Cantona, who's England's favourite Frenchman, about the only one, because it's the farmers of the hops who behave like football celebrities.
Here in Alsace, they are celebrated, scrutinized, idolized.
quickly went viral in huge numbers, aided by video shorts like
The book founders of artists consider reading from Eric Cantona's legation that they need a lifetime of entrepreneurship to borders. Here is what they had to say.
Nous sommes de simples fermiers. Des pauvres fermiers d'Alsace. C'est une insulte de dire que la célébrité nous est montée à la tête.
So very quickly, there were 5 million Twitter interactions. It actually became the most popular campaign in the country. So a good joke had become a great story. Now here's a prank. We had to publicize a new car rental service, a flexible multiple subscription allowing one to use a car on demand no matter where one was. So we actually did something rather pranky. What's happening? subscriptions had almost doubled. So this cranky story really got through, it really aroused people, just as it aroused you. And now for something quite absurd. Our client is Soho, China's leading upmarket real estate developer, and one of the few in China to believe that the originality of design can actually sell for you. And we had to sell their new development, Galaxy, which looks like this. So welcome to Abo, the first monkey in space.
Soho China is not just another real estate development. Soho wrote history with Abo. It was the first private launched into space as part of a top-secret Chinese mission. When communication was lost, the mission was thought a failure until now.
The U.S. may not have been the first country to have successfully sent a monkey into space.
Abo returned far wiser than anyone. He gave an exclusive interview at the landing site of one of Soho China's most original buildings, the new Soho Galaxy designed by Salah Hadid.
你为什么突然选择在这个时间回来了？
中国正在巨变中，人们开始意识到创造力的重要。在我看来，中国已经变成了山寨大国，世纪艺人的原创精神被埋没。
The founders of Soho China strongly agreed with Abo. To them, this copycat culture is a huge problem for the development of China's creative industry. To gather support for Abo's cause, Soho China held a live 30-minute TV debate alongside some of China's leading creative minds and a very special guest.
你觉得如果要用什么词来形容中国，你会发现现在中国呈现一个什么样的模样？那个词是什么？
On the show, Abo used his cheapest charm to voice opinions very few people would get away with under China's ever-present censorship. The debate spread online. It's still available uncensored, which in itself is a massive accomplishment. Taking a lead from Abo, the public started to speak up the future of Chinese creativity. This went up to the highest level.
新新阿伯，我没什么好说。
The Soho Galaxy has sold out entirely, proving people were not only localizing their support for original Chinese creativity, but investing in it. Not bad for a 68-year-old monkey.
So this material in China is red hot, of course. It touches a very, very serious topic, the tolerance of creativity, indeed also of our own industry. It went right to the very, very, very edge. And although it got away with spoiling a debate just because the story was so absurd, certainly there's evidence some of the viral spread was censored by the government. But despite that, it's still got something like 40 million social media impressions. As our Coca-Cola client Javier Sanchez-Lamelas says, in telling a story, you can say things that you could not otherwise say. And this act of absurdity, if you like, sold out 300,000 square feet of Galaxy almost instantly. And finally, a cute story, also from China. One of our clients is the city of Chengdu, in China's booming west. We have an office there, actually. And the job was to raise European and American awareness. So we invented something called the Ambassador, named after the resident pandas. How cute can you get? And this was dubbed the cutest job in the world. We actually ran a global competition to recruit ambassadors, supported by happenings like this, Gangnam Panda. Okay, so I think we have a picture, but can you imagine selling that to a municipal dealer in China? It requires some courage to buy it. But the results were, again, rather spectacular. And within a very short period of time, we got something like 128 million YouTube views, as well as a huge slew of offline media Foreign visitors to Chengdu increased by 1/3 as a result. It's got onto the global map as a city of global importance. So they have 4 stories: a jocular story, a cranky story, an absurd story, a cute story. So what is actually happening here? Well, they're all following principles of arousal on the internet. They all evoke positive emotions. They're all shareable. But they've all got something which our academics found to be critical: a sense of surprise, of the totally unexpected. As MacDonald and Ewing note in AdMap 2012, the key emotional driver of sharing turned out to be surprise. And what happens then is that a ripple of creative joy starts to spread. In fact, what happens is physiological. The neurotransmitter, dopamine, starts working, and the synapses in the brain start firing. This is it. This is the dopamine molecule, the creative molecule, actually. And yes, research shows that each of you as creators has it in larger quantities than ordinary people. So the key to understanding the internet is not technological, it's chemical, actually. And the positive release which comes from arousal actually replicates the processes that are used in therapy. The social sharing of emotion produces immediate benefits, a therapeutic effect. So actually, creators, we have the proof we have always wanted. Advertising is good for you. But I started by talking about moving from great to superlative. There's a higher order of arousal still, when the emotion touches something very, very deep inside of you and helps you rethink you or rethink the world. You all know this piece of film.
I'm a forensic artist. Worked for the San Jose Police Department from 1995 to 2011.
I showed up to a place I'd never been, and there was a guy with a drafting board.
You couldn't see them, they couldn't see us.
First of all, what is your race?
White.
I'm Asian.
Tell me about your hair.
I didn't know what he was doing, but then I could tell after several questions that he was drawing me.
Your jaw.
My mom told me I had a big jaw.
Tell me about your chin.
It kind of protrudes a little bit, especially when I smile.
What would be your most prominent feature?
Kind of a factor on my face.
The older I've gotten, the more freckled I've gotten.
I would say I have a pretty big forehead. If I was to measure my forehead an inch and 3/4, maybe 2 inches.
Once I get a sketch, I say thank you very much, and then they leave. I don't see them.
All I had been told before the sketch was to get friendly with this other woman, Chloe.
Today I'm going to ask you some questions about a person you met earlier, and I'm going to ask you some general questions about their face.
She was thin, so you could see her cheekbones. And her chin, it was a nice, thin chin.
The women were really critical about moles or scars or things like that, and yet they were describing just a normal, beautiful person.
She had nice eyes, standing up when she spoke.
She had very full lips, with really nice teeth.
She had a beautiful smile, great personality.
It's short. Yeah, cute.
She had blue eyes, very nice blue eyes.
So this is your self-described image, and then somebody else described you in this sketch.
Circles and crow's feet around my eyes, and it was not part of the sketch at all that the stranger did. The stranger's was a little more like gentle.
she looks more open and friendly and happy. I've come a long way in how I see myself, and I think it's the way to go.
She was so clearly different. Her picture looked like somebody I thought I would want to talk to and be friends with, like a happy, light, much younger, much brighter person. I have some to do on myself.
This has become the most watched piece of advertising in the world ever. 5.5 billion impressions, and it's only been going for 6 months. The surprise here, of course, is shocking. The difference between how women see themselves and how others see them. It's also profoundly moving. It's dopamine intense. But the same arousal can be achieved in a field as apparently unemotional as technology. Consider our buoyant is Attelmerth idea, which got 2 million views in just 48 hours. statement of the role of science as the foundation of technology, but it's also very touching. Now remember the vagina bubbles from hell, which made Ray William Johnson so easy? Let's return to the subject of vaginas in a very different way. In the US, teenage girls suffer an overload of vagina-related misinformation and fear, interspersed with exaggerated imagery around happy periods. But they're not happy. And our Time to You by Codex is brave enough to tackle this issue head on. Maestro, can I have your help again?
Two Democratic female state legislators were banned from speaking on the State House floor this week, one seemingly for referring to her vagina in a heated debate.
I'm sorry that you're all so interested in my vagina, but no means no.
Vaginas? Taboo? No, bueno. Four girls, four documentaries, one movement to get the truth about their vaginas. I can honestly not remember a single lesson that said, hey, here's a vagina, and this is what it looks like. These are the different parts of it.
They smell the blood. You were terrified. We had a trip to Bear Mountain. My mother said there are bears up there. And if they smell your blood from your period, they're liable to attack you. So I grew up.
Those are all just myths, and you should be caring about the past.
Living in the United States who are considering flying back to India. And it's for British Airways. And they feel the need for greater empathy on behalf of their allies. So the story here is about the family purpose which lies behind the trips. It's a charming story.
When he told me he wanted to go to the US, I felt very excited. But then the
experiment with different things, putting in Stephen box. Most of the time, the other vegetables, they will return from the school untouched. But whenever I am giving okra, it is finished. I asked him, why do you like okra the most? He said, Mama, my teacher has told the child who eats okra becomes best in his mathematics. When we look at the tiffin box, first he will think from where has it come, but once he tastes the food, he will know it is made by his mommy. And I am sure he will start searching for me in his apartment. I miss him so much because when he left home, he was hardly 17 years old. And from that day, he did not return home. I miss my son.
My mom had cooked my favorite meal, and she was waiting for someone from British Airways to pick up the tiffin carrier. So they sent me. After flying from New York to Mumbai, there I was. I got the opportunity to see my mother in a way I had never seen her before. She looked lonely. She looked like she sounds over the phone. I'm here.
Over 48 hours of video go up onto YouTube every minute. Only a tiny percentage spreads. According to Millward Brown, the average hit number in the US is 150,000. In the UK, it's 34,000. Only 16% of ads score more than 1,000 views per week in the UK, and only 13% more than 5,000 in the US. So the last two targeted examples for Kimberly Clark and for British Airways are so far doing not just great, but they're doing superlatively well within their universes. And at the other end of the scale, the surges in sharing for emotionally charged brand video compare strongly with social movements like Earth Hour, or even in the case of Dove, with political campaigns like Re-elect Obama. And as one reflects on all of this, there is one interesting conclusion. Despite all the research, all the analysis of virality, often painfully pedantic, despite a clear sense of why people share, it is still very difficult to predict what makes a certain video or post jump and go into massive share mode. There is no precise formula. Professional bloggers and tweeters themselves are constantly surprised by what makes a post or a tweet take off. That, of course, is good news for you as creatives. Your jobs are safe. In the words of my title, we are talking about the art, not the science, of arousal. This art cannot be overstressed. There seems to be something intrinsically charming about all of the videos I've shown you this morning. So just as we can see that surprise is a critical precursor to arousal at scale, so I believe is charm. Charm meaning beautiful, charm meaning of the highest quality and sensitivity, charm being disarmingly seductive. Our task in advertising is in fact never to be put in that chamber of horrors and sent up by Ray William Johnson for the very opposite of those things. And that is one reason why I don't like the word virus and try to use it as little as possible. I understand the analogy, but to me there is something malign about that word when the research clearly tells us that internet sharing is the sharing of hedonic, pleasurable value. Talking about making things viral somehow feels inappropriate. And you'll notice that the other word that I've not much used is meme, for exactly the same reason. Richard Dawkins, of course, now links the idea of meme with virality. But my sense is that the original meaning had much more to do with deeper transmitted code, like Beowulf, stories of that dimension, than it does with bits of internet flotsam and jetsam. And my colleagues of social at Ogilvy would argue strongly against viral for very different reasons, believing that once there is the intrinsic surprise and charm in a piece of video, the preconditions, then social design should kick in, and through a whole series of interventions, optimize the spread. The ingredients for the forest fire have all got to be there, but it's naive to assume that the ultimate spread happens autonomously. In fact, sensitive and intelligent social design is a critical differentiator of brand success these days. At the end of the day, though, although all the material has to pass muster with the jury, the internet is like a huge, precious, restless, and opaque jury driven by a high degree of emotionality. It and it alone defines something to be a hit or miss. It's ruthlessly critical of any attempt to defraud or trick it, as the storms of outrage over fakes continuously shows. And the comedian Jimmy Kimmel knows to his cost when he tried to fake a twerking video. Complete trust is the requirement for passing this jury. So for us, the lesson of arousal is a resounding one. Emotion works. Each share is a commitment. Each share has to be earned emotively. We might well ask why, as professionals, we have to spend so much time convincing our clients that emotion sells. I can prove it time and time again in all sorts of ways. But why don't we have to reprove it and reprove it? Why does the ignoring by consumers of inert, bland, and unshared content not weigh more heavily on some of those clients who defend rationality to the last bullet point? It may just be that an insight into arousal theory might help the doubters gain faith. Emotion works, and the social internet is a powerful branding tool for that reason. The difference between good and great and superlative lies in the degree to which we can rise above the clamor and connect the brands we represent to popular culture with meaning in stories. So, go play in the park, mutant poodles. We don't really need you. Wipe the scowl off your face, grumpy cat. You're being paid enough now, anyway. We can do better than that. We can do better than average. Put the chorizos on the grill. I'm hungry. We can do good. We can do great. We can do superlative. Thank you.